My mother-in-law stood up at the head of her own Christmas table, tapped her wine glass with a spoon the way people do before a toast, and announced to 11 family members that she was cutting me out of the family permanently. Then she clapped. Not a single, sharp clap of finality. A full round of applause, slow and deliberate, like she was congratulating herself on a decision she'd clearly been waiting months to make in front of an audience. I sat there frozen, a plate of untouched candied yams in front of me, my husband Terrence's hand suddenly rigid on the table beside mine. The room smelled like cinnamon and roasted turkey and the cedar candle Vivian lit every December, and none of it matched what was happening, the way disaster never matches its setting. I've thought long and hard about this, Vivian said, still smiling, still clapping softly like she was closing out a business meeting rather than detonating something in the middle of her own dining room. And I've decided Simone is no longer welcome at family functions. Effective immediately. Nobody moved. Terrence's younger sister, Aaliyah, had her fork halfway to her mouth and simply stopped there, suspended. Terrence's uncle Rodney cleared his throat and studied his plate like it had suddenly become fascinating. "Mom," Terrence said slowly, "what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about respect," Vivian said, turning to him with the same bright, terrible smile. "I'm talking about a woman who's spent 5 years in this family acting like she's better than the rest of us, who barely calls, who couldn't be bothered to help plan a single holiday, who thinks her career makes her too important for family obligations. I've given her every chance. I'm done pretending I don't see it." I felt my face go hot, then cold, then hot again. Every word landed somewhere specific and old, a wound she'd clearly been sharpening for a long time and finally decided to use. "You don't mean this," I managed, my voice smaller than I wanted it to be. "Oh, I absolutely mean it," Vivian said, setting her spoon down with a small, satisfied click against the tablecloth. "Merry Christmas, everyone. Let's eat." She sat back down and began serving herself green beans, as if she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of her own family and clapped for the wreckage. I had no idea, sitting there in stunned silence, that in exactly 5 days, Vivian's entire world was about to detonate right back. To understand why that moment broke something loose in me, you need to understand what I'd actually been doing for Vivian, quietly, for almost 4 years. Vivian hadn't always lived the way she lived. When Terrence and I first got together, his mother was renting a modest 1-bedroom apartment, working part-time at a pharmacy counter. Still recovering financially from a divorce that had gutted her savings and a bad investment her ex-husband talked her into years before that. She was proud, sharp-tongued, and terrified of anyone seeing her as anything less than composed, which made the whole situation worse, because she refused outright help from Terrence whenever he offered it. I was the one who found a way around her pride. 2 years into our marriage, my consulting business had finally stabilized enough that I had real disposable income for the first time in my adult life, and Terrence and I talked about what to do with it. He mentioned, almost offhand, how much it aided him that his mother wouldn't accept help, how he worried about her alone in that apartment with a leaking ceiling she couldn't afford to fix. So I did something he didn't ask for and Vivian never knew about. I set up an anonymous monthly transfer, routed through a small trust one controlled, that quietly covered the difference between what Vivian could afford and what she needed to live somewhere safer, somewhere warmer, somewhere with a working ceiling. I told the property manager it was a family estate distribution, vague enough to be believable, specific enough that nobody asked follow-up questions. Vivian believed, and still believes to this day, that a modest inheritance from a great-aunt she barely remembers finally came through. I did it because I loved Terrence, and because underneath Vivian's sharpness, I genuinely believed there was a woman who deserved dignity in her own life. I did it without expecting gratitude, without ever planning to tell her, because I understood something about pride that Vivian herself had taught me simply by existing near it for years. Help given loudly humiliates the person receiving it. I never imagined I'd be sitting at her Christmas table 4 years later, listening to her clap while she cut me out of a family I had, in more ways than she would ever know, been quietly holding up. Are you enjoying the story? Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. If you're enjoying it so far, Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Because believe me, this story is only getting started. Now, let's get back into it. The car ride home from that Christmas dinner was silent for the first 20 minutes. Terrence finally spoke somewhere past the halfway point, his hands tight on the steering wheel, his jaw working the way it did when he was choosing words carefully instead of saying the first ones that came to him. "I don't understand where that came from," he said. "She's never said anything like that to me. Not once." "She's been building to it," I said quietly, watching the streetlights slide past the window. "You just weren't in the room for most of it." "What do you mean?" I told him, then, about the comments Vivian had made over the years when he wasn't around, the offhand remarks about how career women forget what family is for, the pointed questions about when we were having children that had somehow curdled, over the last year, into pointed statements about how some women choose ambition over legacy. I told him about the Thanksgiving 2 years earlier when she'd introduced me to a new neighbor as Terrence's wife, the busy one, in a tone that made busy sound like an accusation. "Why didn't you tell me any of this?" Terrence asked, and there was real hurt in his voice now, layered under the anger. "Because you love her," I said simply. "And I didn't want to be the reason you saw her differently. I thought if I just kept showing up, kept being patient, she'd eventually see I wasn't going anywhere." Terrence was quiet for a long moment. "She doesn't know, does she? About the money?" "No," I said. "She still thinks it was the Greytance estate." He pulled into our driveway and put the car in park, but didn't move to get out, his hands still resting on the wheel, staring straight ahead into the dark garage. "Simone," he said slowly, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. After tonight, after what she did, standing up and clapping like she'd just won something, do you still want to keep paying for her life?" I sat with that question longer than I expected to. Because the honest answer wasn't simple, and some part of me already knew that whatever I decided in that driveway was going to change everything that came next. I didn't answer him that night. I told him I needed to sleep on it, which was true, though sleep never actually came. I lay awake replaying the sound of that applause, slow and deliberate, the specific cruelty of choosing a joyful family gathering as the stage for humiliating me in front of people who'd known me for years. I thought about Aaliyah's frozen fork, Uncle Rodney's sudden interest in his plate, the way nobody at that table had said a single word in my defense, not even Terrence, not in the moment it actually mattered, only after, safely alone in the car. That last part stung more than I expected it to. Around 3 in the morning, I got up and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop, pulling up the trust account I'd used for 4 years to quietly fund Vivian's apartment, her car payments after her old sedan finally gave out, the small surprise gifts that showed up around her birthday that she attributed to a mysterious pension adjustment I'd invented out of thin air 2 years earlier when the story needed updating. I didn't close anything that night. I just looked at the numbers, the years of quiet transfers, the total sum that would have shocked Vivian into silence if she'd ever known its source, and I felt something crystallize in me that had been soft and forgiving for far too long. The next morning, Terrence found me still at the table, coffee gone cold, beside my laptop. "Did you decide?" he asked carefully. "I decided I'm done being generous with someone who has no idea what generosity even looks like," I said. "I'm done funding a lifestyle for a woman who just stood up in front of everyone we love and clapped while she threw me away." "What does that mean, practically?" "It means," I said, closing the laptop, "that I'm not doing anything dramatic. I'm not calling her to explain myself, and I'm not asking for an apology I doubt she'd give sincerely anyway. I'm simply going to stop. Quietly. The same way I started." Terrence sat down across from me, and for a long moment, he didn't say anything at all. Then he nodded, slow and certain. "Do it," he said. "She made her choice last night." Loudly. It's time she understood choices come with consequences, even the ones you never see coming. I want to be honest with you about something, because I think it matters for understanding what happened next. I hesitated for 3 full days before I actually did anything. Not because I doubted my decision. Because some old, stubborn part of me still wanted to believe Vivian might call and apologize on her own, unprompted, the way a person does when they've had time to sit with their own cruelty and feel its full weight. I gave her that chance. I genuinely did. She didn't call. Instead, on the second day, Aaliyah sent me a message that made the decision easy again. Just so you know, Mom's telling everyone at church you had some kind of breakdown at dinner, and she had to handle it delicately. She's acting like she did you a favor by not embarrassing you further. I told her that's not what happened, but she's not hearing it. I'm sorry, Simone. I should have said something at the table. I read that message twice, feeling the old wound reopen and something colder settle in beside it. Vivian hadn't just humiliated me at Christmas dinner. She was now actively rewriting the story to make herself the gracious victim of my supposed instability, telling it to people I'd have to see for years to come. I thought about the years of quiet support, the anonymous transfers, the fabricated great-aunt whose memory I'd invented to protect this woman's pride. And I thought about how none of that generosity had ever once made her pause before deciding to publicly discard me at her own table. On the third day, I logged into the trust account and initiated the closure. It wasn't complicated, technically a few clicks, a confirmation email, a transfer of remaining funds into an account solely in my name. The whole process took 11 minutes. What took longer was sitting with the weight of it afterward. Because closing that account wasn't really about the money. It was about finally allowing myself to stop protecting someone who had shown me, in front of everyone who mattered, exactly how little she thought I deserved. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt something quieter and heavier than that, the particular exhaustion of finally putting down something you'd been carrying so long you'd forgotten how heavy it actually was. Monday morning, 4 days after Christmas, Vivian's phone rang while she was getting ready for a lunch with her church committee. I wasn't there, obviously. I only know what happened because Aaliyah, who'd stopped by that morning to drop off a casserole dish, watched the entire thing unfold and told me every detail later, still slightly stunned by what she'd witnessed. It was Vivian's bank, calling to confirm a large transfer out of an account she apparently checked so rarely she hadn't noticed the deposits pattern in the first place, let alone understood where they came from. The representative explained, according to Aaliyah, that the account's authorized funding source had initiated a full closure, and that Vivian's linked accounts, the ones covering her rent, her car payment, the small monthly pension supplement she'd been living on for 2 years, would no longer receive automatic transfers as of that billing cycle. Aaliyah said her mother's face went through 3 distinct stages during that call: confusion, disbelief, and then something close to panic. "What do you mean funding source?" Vivian said, according to Aaliyah, her voice climbing in pitch. "What funding source?" "This is my pension. This is my great-aunt's estate." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the representative said something that apparently made Vivian sit down hard on her own kitchen chair. "Ma'am, there's no estate account on file. This has been a private trust transfer for the last 4 years. The account holder has requested full closure effective immediately." Aaliyah said her mother sat in silence for almost a full minute after hanging up, staring at nothing, before she finally looked up and asked the question that apparently answered itself the moment she said it out loud. "It was Simone, wasn't it?" Vivian said. "The whole time. It was Simone." Aaliyah didn't answer right away. She told me later she didn't need to. Her mother's face had already told her everything, the exact moment 4 years of quiet, humiliating generosity clicked into place, and with it, the exact moment Vivian understood precisely what she had thrown away at that Christmas table. Clapping the entire time. Vivian called Terrence 11 times before he finally picked up. I know because I was sitting beside him when the 12th call came through, and I watched him look at the screen for a long moment before answering, putting it on speaker without asking me if that was all right, which felt, in its own small way, like an apology for the silence in that dining room 5 days earlier. "Terrence, thank God," Vivian said, her voice higher and thinner than I'd ever heard it. "Something's happened with my accounts. Some kind of mistake at the bank. I need you to call them, explain there's been an error." "There's no error, Mom," Terrence said, his voice level. Silence stretched on the line. "You knew," Vivian said slowly. "You knew about this. About Simone." "I've known for 2 years," Terrence said. "I found out by accident, and Simone asked me not to say anything because she didn't want you to feel indebted or embarrassed. She wanted you to have your dignity, Mom." That's the only reason any of it was anonymous in the first place. Then why would she just pull it all away like this, without warning? You stood up at Christmas dinner, Terrence said, and I heard something harden in his voice, in front of 11 people, and announced you were cutting your daughter-in-law out of this family permanently. You clapped, Mom. You clapped like you'd won something. And this whole time, she'd been quietly making sure you had a roof over your head and a car that ran and enough left over every month to feel like the Greytance estate story you told yourself was true. I didn't know, Vivian said, and her voice cracked now, something raw finally breaking through the composure she'd worn like armor my entire time knowing her. I didn't know it was her. If I'd known, would it have mattered? Terrence asked, and the question hung there, heavy and unanswerable, because I think all three of us understood, in that moment, that the true measure of Vivian's Christmas announcement had nothing to do with money at all. It had been about what she genuinely believed I deserved, long before she ever found out what I'd actually been doing for her. Vivian showed up at our house 2 days later, uninvited, her composure rebuilt but visibly thinner around the edges, like a woman wearing a coat one size too small and pretending it still fit. I almost didn't let her in. Terrence looked at me, silently asking what I wanted to do, and I surprised myself by opening the door anyway, because some part of me needed to hear whatever she'd come to say. Needed to watch her say it to my face instead of imagining it secondhand through Aaliyah's account of a phone call. I owe you an apology, Vivian said, standing stiffly in our living room, refusing the seat Terrence offered her. For Christmas. For all of it, I suppose, though I didn't understand the scope of what all of it meant until Monday. Why did you do it? I asked, my voice steady, though my hands were not. Truly. Not the version you told the church committee. The real reason. Vivian was quiet for a long moment, her jaw working the same way Terrence's did when he was choosing honesty over comfort. Because you never needed anything from me, she finally said. Not my approval, not my help, not even my affection, really. You just kept showing up, patient and unbothered, like my opinion of you was a small thing you could survive without. And some ugly, small part of me decided that if I couldn't make you need me, I would make you disappear instead. I told myself a story where you were the problem, because it was easier than admitting the actual problem was how threatened I felt by a woman who never once asked me for anything. I stood with that admission for a long moment, feeling its honesty land somewhere I hadn't expected to be moved. I never asked for anything, I said quietly, because I wasn't trying to take your place, Vivian. I was trying to make room for both of us. I know that now, she said, and for the first time since I'd known her, her voice broke completely. I know that now, and I don't know how to undo what I said in front of everyone, or what I did to a woman who was quietly keeping my life together the entire time I was trying to end hers. I didn't reopen the account. I want to be honest about that, because I know some people listening to this expect a story where the wronged woman quietly restores everything once the apology lands, proving her goodness through renewed sacrifice. That's not what happened, and I don't think it should have. What I told Vivian, standing in my living room that day, was that I was willing to rebuild a relationship with her, slowly, on completely different terms than the ones we'd operated under for 4 years. No more secrets. No more quiet, anonymous rescues designed to protect her pride at the cost of my own visibility in her life. If she needed help, she would ask for it directly, and I would decide, openly, whether and how to give it, the way family is supposed to operate when it's built on honesty instead of performance. Vivian struggled with that at first. Terrence told me later that asking directly for help felt, to his mother, like the very vulnerability she'd spent decades trying to outrun. The same vulnerability that had made her furious at me for existing so steadily and needing nothing from her in return. But she did it eventually. 6 weeks after Christmas, she called me directly, not Terrence, not through Aaliyah, and asked, plainly, if I might help her find a part-time bookkeeping position, since her pharmacy skills were rusty, but her mind for numbers, she admitted almost sheepishly, had always been sharper than people gave her credit for. I helped her put together a resume that weekend. It felt strange, sitting across from her at my own kitchen table instead of quietly managing her life from a distance she never knew existed, but it also felt, for the first time in 4 years, honest. She found a position within a month, modest but steady, the first income she'd earned under her own name in almost a decade. I watched something in her posture change the day she told me about it, not gratitude toward me, exactly, but something that looked, unmistakably, like pride in herself. It's been a year since that Christmas dinner now, and Vivian still works at that bookkeeping job, still pays her own rent with her own earnings, supplemented by a modest, openly discussed arrangement Terrence and I help with when she genuinely needs it. Never in secret, never without her knowing exactly where it comes from. She hasn't clapped at another family dinner since. I don't say that to be unkind, I say it because I think we both understand, without ever needing to discuss it directly, what that applause actually meant, and neither of us wants to revisit whatever place inside her it came from. Terrence and I talk about that Christmas often, mostly because it changed something fundamental in how he shows up for me now. He doesn't stay quiet anymore when his mother says something sharp at a family gathering. He doesn't wait for the car ride home to defend me. I think watching his mother's carefully constructed world crack open, watching her finally have to build something honest and small and entirely her own, taught him something about the cost of silence that no amount of talking ever could have. As for me, I think about the years I spent quietly funding a life for a woman who was, underneath all her sharpness, simply terrified of being unnecessary. I don't regret the help I gave her, even now, even knowing how it ended at that table with her clapping like she'd won something. I regret only that I let the secrecy of it become its own kind of shrinking, a way of making myself smaller and more invisible so she could feel steadier standing near me. The lesson I carry now isn't about money or revenge or even about mothers-in-law specifically. It's simpler than that and harder to live by than it sounds. Real generosity doesn't require your own erasure to survive. You can hold someone up without disappearing to do it. And the people who truly deserve your kindness will never need you to shrink yourself first in order to receive it. Vivian finally understands that now. It only took losing everything she thought was hers to see clearly what had actually been holding it up the entire time. The end.